Why do we continue in jobs we don't find meaningful? Why do we continue to use old tools and softwares although there are better new alternatives available? Or why are we so afraid of trying something new? Today, we will unpack a major problem in our decision making that forces us to continue with our existing choices and prevents us from choosing better alternatives. We'll also try to understand its reasons and two possible ways in which we could avoid this issue. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Break School podcast, where we discuss ideas and people who could help us do what we love every day and make a living out of it. Let's go back a few years from now to understand the issue that I just spoke about. It was November 2014. I was in my final year of engineering and preparing for jobs. I really wanted to get into a data analytics firm, but I was already rejected by two companies, and a third company had not even shortlisted me. During the same time, I got to know about this interesting program called the Young India Fellowship, or YIF. YIF is a liberal arts program where 200 students from across the country are selected to study courses around social science, arts, and humanities. I really wanted to get into this program, but surprisingly, I did not fill the application form for a really long time. Instead, I only focused on applying to jobs, and in January 2015, which was 3 months later, I was rejected by one more analytics firm. That day, I very clearly remember I went to a park. Sitting on a bench there, I wondered, why was I being rejected? I had decent scores, I had done good work at Toastmasters, and I was quite active in many not for profit communities. But none of that seemed to matter to the interviewers. Sitting there, I thought of YF again. I wondered if those guys would value what I did other than getting my degree. It took me a few weeks to complete the application form, but I finally applied. I made it to the final round, and to my utter shock, I was selected with full scholarship. Now, that's where the story ends. The question for you is, why did I delay applying to YIF for so long, although I really wanted to get into this program? It's the same reason why we stay in careers we don't like, or why we continue to use old tools and method, although there are better alternatives available. It's a problem called the status quo bias. The status quo bias is a tendency to stick to your existing choices. In my case, it was a tendency to continue applying to jobs, although there was a better alternative in YIF. But why do we exhibit status quo bias? A study on status quo bias by William Samuelson from Boston University and Richard Zackhauser from Harvard University shows various reasons why we exhibit this bias. I'll explain four reasons mentioned by them to help us understand specifically why we continue in jobs and careers we don't find meaningful. Please note, each of the reasons that I'm going to mention is a long topic in itself. If you're curious and really want to dig deeper, I've shared a link to the study in the show notes section of the episode. I also encourage you to read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a great book to understand why we behave the way we behave. So let's dive in and understand the reasons for status quo bias. Reason number one, sunk cost fallacy. Let's go back to my story to understand this. I got to know about YF 3 months after I started applying to jobs. While I was definitely excited about the fellowship, getting into the fellowship was tough. Its application form was long and tedious, and I was required to write a lot of essays. I wasn't sure if it was worth spending time doing all of that. I thought it was much safer to spend my time on job applications since I've already spent 3 months doing it. This is a case of sunk cost fallacy, a situation where you continue to invest time, money, and resources in a project or a career just because you've already invested so many years in it. But why don't we abandon our projects or careers when we know it's not working? Because abandoning our projects means accepting failure, accepting humiliation, or being seen as a loser. And who likes to be called a loser? Reason number two, regret avoidance. Regret avoidance basically means we avoid decisions that we would regret later. Now, that is obvious. Of course, it's common sense. But the insight here is we humans regret a consequence more when it is due to our action than inaction. Let's say you've been working in an IT company for 6 years. You don't feel like you're learning anything anymore. You don't like the work. And you're very keen about pursuing food blogging. Now, there are two possibilities. Situation one, you continue in your job, and a year later, you're still unhappy about your work. Situation two, you pursue food blogging full time, but a year later, you realize you don't enjoy food blogging either. You're again unhappy. In both the cases, the final outcome is the same. You are unhappy. But in which case do you think you would regret more? In situation one, you just continued with your default choice, your job. If you're unhappy, you can still blame your company. But in situation two, you are responsible for your consequence because you are unhappy after taking some active action. The regret is definitely going to be high in the second scenario. This fear of regret from our actions, along with sunk cost fallacy, compels us to do nothing about our current problem and stick to our existing choices, even if they don't serve us better. Reason number three, anchoring effect. Anchoring effect in decision making means that we measure the value of an alternative option relative to an existing option. Let me go back to my story to help you understand better. When I had to apply to YF, my existing option was applying to jobs. YF application, as I've already mentioned, was long and tedious. It required far more effort than applying to jobs. For YF, I had to compete with students from some of the best universities in the country. For jobs, I had to compete with people from my own college. That's it. Although I was rejected by many companies already, I felt my chances of getting a job appeared much better than getting into YF. So I continued with my existing option, applying to jobs. Similarly, going back to our previous example, when you're comparing food blogging with your regular job, this is how you would think. I've already spent 6 years in the company. I'm a manager now, and I get a decent salary every month. My parents are happy. My wife is happy. Everything seems fine. Just that I'm not liking my work, but that's not a big problem, maybe. But hey, what about food blogging? Uh, I see. I love traveling and writing about local food, but I'm not sure if I'll earn enough from this every month. And if I fail, I'll really look stupid. At least for now, people respect me for being a manager in my company. It is quite natural that a person would stick to his job than pursue food blogging. And I say natural not just because of anchoring effect. Anchoring effect is only making you do this comparison. But I say natural because of a final reason, which is the mother of all these reasons: loss aversion. Nobel Prize laureate Daniel Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky have shown through prospect theory that we humans weigh losses twice as much as gains in decision making. That is, the pain you experience on losing 1,000 rupees is twice as much as the joy you would experience on earning the same 1,000 rupees. This implies that for you to move from your job to, let's say, something like food blogging, the gains from food blogging must be at least two times of what you would lose by giving up your job. The factor two times can vary between 1.5 times and three times depending on how risk seeking or risk averse you are. But the point is, our tendency to avoid losses is more than our desire to make gains. Now, this behavior has an evolutionary reason. As Daniel Kahneman writes in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, the asymmetry between the powers of positive and negative expectations or experiences has an evolutionary history. Organisms that treat threat as more urgent than opportunities have a better chance to survive and reproduce. This also partly explains why I did not apply to YF for a very long time. Because I thought instead of spending time on YF application, I can use the same time to apply to multiple jobs. My fear of not getting a job was much, much bigger than my desire to get into YF. So, folks, those were four major reasons why we exhibit status quo bias and stick to jobs we don't like. Now, you may ask, can I do something about it? The answer is both no and yes. No, because it's not possible to get rid of your biases. You cannot eliminate them. They have been wired into our brains over thousands of years. They helped us survive in jungles. They helped us make decisions in dangerous situations. They helped us deal with uncertain scenarios. Although our surroundings have changed from jungles to villages to modern cities, the way our brain operates has not changed with the same speed. But what you can really do is firstly have an awareness of these biases and then build systems that could help us avoid them in decision making. One way I'm trying to do this is by maintaining a decision making journal. I came across the idea of decision making journal on Fernam Street blog by Shane Parrish. Shane has a wonderful article on it, and I strongly recommend you read it. I'm sharing a link to the article in the show notes section of the episode. But broadly, what it means is that every time you make a decision, write down the following things in a piece of paper. What decision are you taking? What outcomes do you expect? Why are you choosing this over other alternatives? And how do you feel right now? That is, what is your emotional state? Do you feel confident? Do you feel afraid? Do you feel skeptical, sick, etc.? Once you're done, review this journal either at regular intervals or whenever the outcome of your decision is clear. If your outcome is as expected, it implies that you have a good decision making process in place. But if the outcomes are bad or if they are not favorable, it will reflect what you could have done better. Maybe researched more, maybe avoid taking decision in negative emotional state, maybe you should avoid talking to a few people, etc., etc. This exercise will not completely eliminate status quo bias, but it will create a solid feedback loop to make sure you're aware of situations where you're more prone to sticking to your existing choices, even though there are better alternatives available. Apart from decision making journal, another action that could help you is taking a break or sabbatical from your current career. From my conversations with people who have taken sabbaticals, unplugging from your current day to day setting will help you work on a few things that you've not had the time to focus on. It will allow you to reevaluate your priorities and things that you really value. So, to summarize the snippet, we stay in careers we don't like or continue to use old tools because of status quo bias. It's a tendency to stick to your existing option even if there are better alternatives available. Four major reasons for status quo bias. 1. Sunk cost fallacy. It makes you believe that you need to continue in your existing careers because you've already spent so many years in it. 2. Regret avoidance. It prevents you from doing anything where you will have to take ownership of your failure. You'd rather fail by doing nothing than by taking action. 3. Anchoring effect. Makes you compare a new career with your existing one, which is definitely much safer and predictable. And finally, the mother of all reasons, loss aversion. Our deep desire for certainty and a strong tendency to avoid losses compels us to stick to our existing choices rather than take a step out and do what we love. If you found this snippet valuable, then please do share this forward. If you enjoyed the snippet, then you will definitely love our next episode where I have Anurag Vaish, co-founder of India's leading behavioral science firm, Final Mile Consulting, speak about why our actions are so far away from our intentions. Why do we intend to do so much but do so little? Make sure you subscribe to the Break School podcast and don't miss out on future episodes. See you again next week. Until then, do what you love every day.